brings her back to us. Where'd you find some of this stuff?
Well, we called every single clip service in the United States and also in England and Australia. You saw one clip from Australia. And we also went to UCLA, USC. We found some in the US archive, that great piece with the number with Ted Shapiro and her, both the numbers. The clear one was in the US archives, and the other one was in one of the other film clips services.
That was in the British Lion film, Gay Love.
Yeah. And we tried to search for that horrible picture she made, the honky-tonk picture, and we never could find it, and we really think that she had every one of them burned.
As far as the audio of Ted Shapiro, that was great. That was in England, and Michael Friedland, who was we interviewed him. He had interviewed Ted Shapiro personally, and this audio tape, we said, by the way, do you have any audio? He had kept it. It was in the attic somewhere, and he had to have his grandson go up and look for it, but we were fortunate enough to get that, because that was a rare piece of audio.
I bribed his grandson with $500 to go up to the attic. Please go up to the attic and see if you have that.
I think a big fan is coming up here to see you.
Hey, William!
The director, William Kozecki, ladies and gentlemen. It's beautifully put together. I'm not saying it just because you just walked up now. This is my third time seeing it. This is my third. Tell us about these scrapbooks, because I love the whole bookend of making this film, the scrapbook that comes to life for us. Tell us about how you found these scrapbooks, because you're among the first people to find them in decades.
Right. Well, yes. Okay. So they were buried. They were at the New York Library, and they were buried under a tarp in the basement, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, because there had been a flood. And so, the reason we knew they were there is because, again, Michael Friedland had written a very small biography about Sophie, and in his autobiography page it said the scrapbooks of Sophie Tucker. So when we researched and we found they only had 3 available to us, and the rest were buried under a tarp. So we nagged, didn't work, and so finally we made a very sizable donation to have them microfilmed, to put on microfilm, and that's how we were able to get them up from the basement. And then putting them on film, it was William who was...
When we met William in 2009, we only asked him one thing. I said, bring the scrapbooks alive.
Oh.
And he did.
Succeeded tremendously.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. You know, what's interesting about those scrapbooks is nobody has ever looked through them like these two have.
Right.
They just have never been reviewed. And what I found really interesting was that some of these stories that we're telling took almost her entire life to unfold. You know, they told me about letters that they found, say, from the 1950s, where someone would say, remember in 24 or 1925 when we met? So there were these stories and these anecdotes and these images, and the whole flow of her life really, you know, took place over a long, long period of time, and nobody has ever been able to get sort of a handle on it without reading all these different things that tied together. Because they would tell me, oh, we found this letter, and it related to something from 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier, and I found that really, really interesting, because that's...
I'd like you to explain something to all of us who may have heard of her name in a memory book from a grandparent. Now, my grandma, as I told you on the phone, my grandma worshipped Sophie Tucker. Her favorite song was Yiddish Mama. She dressed like Sophie Tucker, so she was present. But for all of us who live in a world where today, a lot of the people, you know, there are people out there that don't even know who Cary Grant is anymore. And so to try to bring Sophie Tucker to the current mainframe is a difficult task. And tell them how important she really was and the legacy for modern performers today, like Christina Aguilera, who is a modern machine. She's just another Sophie Tucker incarnate. Explain to us.
Well, I mean, by the time 1918 came, she was bigger than the Beatles at that time. Remember the Beatles had their mop tops? Well, on the front page of on the cover of all the magazines was Sophie Tucker with her hair. And everybody changed their hair to her hair when she changed to a bob in the roaring 20s. they all changed to a bob because that's how big she was.
Except for the bow. I don't think anybody went around with that big bow that we saw. That didn't make it in the front pages of it. But what Sophie also did is she was the first woman to get up on stage and use innuendo. At that time, men were getting up on stage and using innuendo, but not women. And so the fact that she broke that barrier for women is why we see Madonna and Bette Midler and even Jean Harlow and Mae West. Sophie was the one who paved the way for that. And Lady Gaga, I think, is the Sophie Tucker of the 21st century because she breaks those boundaries, she tests the limits, and she does it with a fabulous voice. So I think she's...
Sophie didn't wear a meat dress because she would have eaten it.
I have a question for you, sir. I want to, first of all, I want to compliment you. I know that you didn't do the animation, but because there isn't scads of film footage of Sophie Tucker, a very inventive thing you have in this film. Wasn't it amazing to watch all those photographs come alive in animation? That is pretty darn terrific. How did that decision come to be? Because as a filmmaker, that is just exquisite.
Well, Greg DeGenti, who was our animator, I don't know if he's still here or not, I think he was, or he's going to be here with us tonight. But he and I worked together. It was, a lot of these things are chicken and egg situations where, the actual scrapbooks were not nearly as attractive as what you see on the screen. And nor were they anywhere near as organized because we had created themes and certain, all these segments that you see were all sort of constructed from the raw material. Right. But Greg just was very talented, and I was so blessed to have so much material to work with. Generally in a film like this, you've got a couple of photos, a little bit of footage, and you're doing recreations, and you're talking to people that aren't very interesting, kind of academic, kind of yada. But one of the reasons these two are on screen the way they are, that was my idea. Because there are no Sophie Tucker experts in the world. Right. They don't exist. There's never anybody who's really, there's a couple people that we have on screen who wrote their thesis or, part of a book, a chapter or something. But it really was all about trying to get a sense of the whole person, her whole life. And I became very enmeshed with her. I saw these guys really fell in love with her. And I thought, if I could make a film where people would feel the same way at the end, where they really appreciated her, and went,
Well, I think that people actually feel a little cheated that they didn't get to know her even better the way we would know Sinatra or Dean Martin or any.
Well, what's funny is when you talk to people who really saw her and knew her work, it's unmistakable. There's an absolute immediate. Oh, of course, Sophie. She was art.
Can you explain to us?
I was going to say that we've been traveling around with this film for a year, and there are always members of the audience who come up and tell us their story, that they saw Sophie. Somebody tonight just said they saw Sophie in England. Sophie was huge in England, but her father-in-law had taken her to see Sophie. People have these stories, and they feel like they know Sophie when they see her on stage. And she also would become friends with the audience members to have dinner at their house on Friday night. So she made herself available to her audience, not just as an icon, but as a human being, and that's the sense we got from everybody we speak to.
We get letters once a week at least from somebody who said, I was at a Seder with her. My grandmother loved her, and we made friends with her, and then every time she came in town, it really happened. She had hundreds of thousands of friends.
Somebody here today had a picture.
Yeah,
with Sophie,
I saw that.
and we saw that picture, yeah.
When I was watching this film, there's a moment where you show the merchandising of Sophie Tucker, and there were a couple of ads that were in Hebrew. Explain to us why, especially those of us of the Jewish persuasion, should embrace this woman and champion and hold her in high regard.
She had three core groups of fans. She had the Jewish audience, she had the non-Jewish audience, and then she had the royalty audience, literally the royalty of the US and the royalty of England and everywhere else she went. And she played those three kinds of theaters each place. So she turned her act into whatever was needed for that, because she didn't do Yiddish when she was with the royals. She didn't even do it when she went to Scotland, for instance. If she wasn't in the Jewish theater, she would just do Bawdy, and they would love that. And so when you see those ads with the Yiddish, that's playing to the Yiddish papers. But she also did so the radio tubes. She was playing to everybody that wanted to buy a radio, one of the first people. So, you know, she would adjust business-wise, and it was, for her, it was a business, to whatever audience she was talking to.
As you make this film, you have to make certain decisions. They're the producers, but you have to put it together in a cohesive way.
Sure.
And there's some amazing footage. What did you not use?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. What did I not use? You know, there's some wonderful stories, but they were just too detailed and intricate, and they were too long. You know, I think the one that I was the most trepidation over is the World War II Berlin story, which I felt just had to be in the movie. It just had to be in. It was the one that really got me going. When we were getting to know each other, I just felt that was the one that moved me the most.
In my first viewing, I had to rewind to watch that again because I lost it a little bit because I thought that was just so powerful.
The way we worked, Lloyd would work until 4 o'clock in the morning. I would usually go to bed around 1. And one morning, he comes in at 4 and he wakes me up and said, "I'm sorry to wake you, but you have to read this letter." And it was that letter, and we were both in tears. I mean, it was one of these things that when we found it, we said that this is the core of the movie, and it was.
And so William probably doesn't remember this, but
You never told me that.
William doesn't remember this, but every time I said, "Why don't we put that story in?" He says, "Put that in the book."
Right, that's a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, so now we wrote one and we're going to write 2 more after this. But the first book is about her childhood from 0 to 27, and then the second book's the middle years, and the third book will be the end years. But, you know, the first book, by the way, to get Sophie back into the public, we had a scheme right from the beginning that this guy was in on, was that we would do young Sophie, and that's what the Broadway play is hopefully going to. The Yankee Stadium for Babe Ruth. Well, they basically built the palace for Sophie Tucker.
So the theater that Sophie built.
The palace. That's right.
And I know you're going to be actually continuing the Sophie tradition in that after the show, you are selling your book after.
But we give change.
We give change.
How wonderful.
Yeah, right, they do give change.
What I want to is, if there's anyone that has a question, raise your hand and I'll catch you. If you don't have a question, we will. There's so much here. But is there someone in the back? If you got a good Sophie voice, yell it out.
So the question is, why now? Why now? Actually, it started in 2006, all the research, but why now? Because I think that Sophie now would be perfect to come into the foray, because women of today have to have a role model that says, my body is good, my body is beautiful, it doesn't matter how much I weigh. And in the culture that we have now, with all the anorexia and the bulimia, I think it's important for women to have that kind of a role model, number one. Number two, she was, as Lloyd's favorite part of her is that she was a great businesswoman. So here's a woman who is not only confident about herself, but also is in charge of her own career. She has a great message to send to women of today. Does that answer your question? I just want to repeat, he said it was amazing. Just so everybody can hear.
I have a Dutch story.
Thank you.
So Sophie Tucker in 1910 was first time she was going west. And she got to Denver or somewhere around there, and they said, "So where have you been around the world?" And she said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I was in Amsterdam, and I had tea with the Queen of Amsterdam, Queen Wilhelmina. And the only problem was she had never left the United States. And so then about 20, 30 years later, in the 1930s, she got invited to Queen Wilhelmina's castle or whatever palace, and she actually sang for her and she told her that story. And they actually did meet about 25 years later.
This film unfolds and shows so many wonderful things, but for those of you, I come from a film preservation background, and we were talking yesterday, as wonderful as this is, some of this footage we may never have seen and would have been completely lost. I'd like you to explain the first shot in the film and the footage we saw with her and Ted Shapiro from that British Lion film from *34, and how you made it was almost gone, pretty much. Someone spearheaded.
Well, the first shot we found at a clip service, and we found the second shot at a clip service too, but then William had a friend at the U.S. Archives.
Yeah, the Library of Congress, actually, yeah.
Yes. And because of that, it was in pristine condition, and that's why the second clip with Ted and her singing at the piano looks like yesterday. I mean, it could have been. It was beautiful.
Because those are the opening of the film and that gorgeous footage are from the same film.
Same film.
But there's no good footage of the beginning.
No, it's gone.
If you don't know, 78% of all film that has been photographed on film is gone. 78%. And imagine Sophie Tucker, who's not well remembered today, who's looking after those films. They are. There's a question in Secaucus, New Jersey, back there. Just yell it out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. I have a minute. Yes. Since Sophie Tucker's era had something to do with WW2 and the Holocaust, did Sophie know about what was going on with the Jewish people, and could she have prevailed upon the then president, not mentioning his name right now, to help the Jewish people?
Sophie was very well aware, and she did what she could. That we saw lots of letters where she was helping people to get sponsorship so they could get out of Europe. Many letters where, where she was, one letter, I'm sorry, but she wrote to Hitler. All right, let's cut this out. It seems like a joke to us, but remember that? She wrote this letter to Hitler.
That's one of the things that's not in the film, is that her writing to Hitler. That's right.
Yeah.
But she went to Europe from 1922 to 1936, and then she took a break because she you couldn't go there anymore. But one of her stops was in Berlin. She sang on the radio there in 1931. She made a pack of friends there, like everywhere else. And we think we verified that over 100 families she got out of Europe. And by the way, that president you're talking about was one of her pals, remember Mr. FDR there. And as you saw in the film, she was still friends with Eleanor when she in the 60s. And she did go with Eddie Cantor. Both of them lobbied Congress and did everything they could to tell them to open their eyes. But you know the rest of the story. They were talking to deaf ears.
Yes, sir.